But we get so wrapped up in our numbers. What's our weekly hours? What's our weekly billable hours? What is our revenue? Are we growing? And things like that. And sometimes we start seeing our caregivers kind of as commodities, and it's just like an item. I don't think we appreciate them enough. And so I often see that as being kind of the place that we kind of, I think, fail sometimes as home care owners. We just, we forget to see them as people.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zingage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. All right, we are back with another episode of Home Care Hindsight, brought to you by Zingage, the leading caregiver engagement platform. I am joined this week by Krystal Wilkinson. Krystal, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And so, Krystal, for people who are not familiar with you, how would you introduce yourself?
All right. Well, I'm an owner and operator of a home care agency here in Arizona. We have currently 4 locations, 3 up in the Phoenix area and 1 down in Tucson. I currently live in Tucson. Actually, I grew up in Phoenix, but lived in Tucson for 20 years. When I say currently, been here forever.
I did that the other day. I recently moved, and I would be like, oh yeah, I grew up in Memphis, and then I lived for a little while in Jackson, Tennessee. And I was like, no, I lived for 15 years there. So I was
Time
from
flies.
there. Yeah. There's a special kind of Southern accent, though, that people in Jackson, Tennessee would use to ask the question, like, were you born in the hospital in town? And it would be the difference of, are you from here or are you from here? There was like a you.
Okay.
Anyways, I don't know if there's a variation of that in Tucson, but...
No, but we do have this really great bumper sticker because most of us have been transplanted from somewhere, and it says, no, I'm not a native, but I got here as soon as I could.
I love that. That's good. Well, Tucson's great. It's especially this time of year. It's not even like 1,000,000 degrees yet.
Oh, it's beautiful. Gorgeous.
What I found really interesting as we were getting to know one another is you've got a really interesting story of how you got into home care in the first place. Mm-hmm. To an extent, it was not really your decision to buy into the business.
Kind of, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my history was actually the fact that I worked in global outreach. So I had families all over the world that I was working with, kind of like a case manager, but it wasn't on the medical side. My husband, neurology specialist in the pharmaceutical world, was diagnosed with cancer. So we kind of got thrown a ringer. Before his diagnosis, my husband was a big runner and big mountain bike. He'd do like these 24-hour races because you could. I'm not really sure if I'd have the draw to ride my bike for 24 hours or even with a team where you ride in loops for 24 hours or whatever. And he was diagnosed with kind of a very aggressive form of cancer, and it took him down pretty quick. And so it was a very fast moving type of cancer. And so we decided to do a very aggressive form of chemo, which ended up being 8 hours of drip infusion, 6 days a week with Sundays off. And we do 6 weeks, take a week off, start all over again. And, what do you do when you have cancer and you're laying in your hospital bed? You start thinking about your bucket list, right? Yeah. So he created his bucket list. And one of the things he had always wanted to be was an entrepreneur. And so he wanted to get a business. And we had some conversations that, what if I don't survive this? How are you going to get the kids through college and pay your bills? Because my job was an awesome job, but as anybody knows, it's never quite enough money. So he started looking, and the gentleman that he got as a broker, he hired himself a broker from the hospital bedside, and he hired the guy, and he got to know us a little bit, and he kind of suggested home care, and my initial thought was, no way, nope, that's not going to be for us or whatever. And he encouraged us to just meet a lady who is actually up in the Phoenix area, and said, what, if you knew how to do it really right, I think you'd change your mind. So my husband couldn't travel at the time. So I made the trip up to Phoenix and met this woman, and her name was Karen. And Karen had started out like as a 16-year-old girl, kind of helping a neighbor. And that blossomed into hiring a few friends. And then in 1996, the federal government came to her and said, hey, listen, you got to incorporate. You're now running a
Right.
business. And so she did. And so Adult Care Assistance was born in 1996. And when I met her, I just loved her passion. Her way of approaching her clients and her caregivers was very much like family. And I just kind of fell in love with her. So I came home and told my husband, yeah, we've got to do this. And so the idea was that my husband would probably not go back into pharmaceuticals. He would probably run this business or what have you. And long story short, ended our cancer treatments, our chemo, and he was able to return back to work.
Yeah.
And he went back to work, and we're still kind of finishing up the whole process of purchasing this business.
Sure.
And we had a conversation that kind of was like, I can't do this. This is my calling. I want to go back to my old job. And I was like, but you can't not do this. And so it ended with we'll call it a colorful conversation. I think it went something like, okay, fine, you do it. And it was like, fine, I will. And all of a sudden we fast forward and here I am. And we closed on that business on January 1st of 2012. My friend Karen, who was the previous owner, she was also had cancer. She was in her final stages of it. She did pass away on May 1st of 2012. So we did lose a wonderful, amazing woman who really impacted the industry. And I've tried to take her legacy forward and grow it from there. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah.
I'm sticking with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you're like, 13 years into the fine I will. And seems like things have worked out pretty well so far.
Yeah, I sometimes say, God has to hit you upside the head with a 2x4 to tell you what you're really supposed to be doing. I think that happened to me. I didn't realize what I was supposed to be doing. And now there's no doubt this is my calling. This is where I should have been. So
God has to hit you upside the head with a 2x4.
Yeah, some of us don't listen very well.
Sure. Yeah, I'm definitely in that category of people. Well, so I want to transition to a part of the show where I ask, what kind of person are you? And your undergrad has nothing to do with what you're doing in your previous career or in this current one. So talk a little bit about that.
No. So I had this dream of being, I don't know if I wanted to be a star, but I have a theater arts background. So love being behind the scenes, love calling the show, being part of the magic, love the Broadway theater. I played the piano. I was vocal major. And that really translates well into senior care. So it's funny when people do find out that that's kind of my background. It's amazing how many communities want to get me scheduled to come play the piano at their community.
Yeah,
I don't do that very often, but anyway, that's something I get asked about.
Yeah, there's a certain level of if you say you play the piano, I'm sure we can get this out of tune piano ready for you in our community. And it's like, no, that's not really what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah,
so
I do home care.
Yeah. Is there a favorite production you were a part of?
Probably my funniest production I was probably a part of was back in the day. We lived in Palm Desert for a while, and I worked at the McCollum Theater, and we had the off-Broadway version of Peter Pan come through. And I was backstage, and one of our stagehands got sick or something, wasn't able to be there. So I stepped in to be the stagehand, and there's a section where we had to switch out our the scene, and there was barrels the big wine barrels that he was supposed to fall back on and sit on, and I accidentally put it out backwards, and he fell in and got stuck in it. He was kind of upset, but it made for a really funny show because he was stuck in the barrel versus on sitting on top of it because the wrong side was up. But we ended up really bonding that whole tour group coming through because it's 9 nights, 15 shows that we ended up doing, and it happened on the first show. And after that, they were like, "Are you putting it out the right direction?" And I just really enjoyed working with that crew. That was just a really, really great group. So that was probably one of my favorite memories. Unfortunately, I screwed up. We all laughed about it, and it turned out okay.
Yeah. Well, it's a good segue. It's funny you mentioned mistakes because, as you know, I bring people on the show who've accomplished a lot, but not to talk about all the good stuff, but instead to ask about the biggest mistake that they made and what that taught them about their business. And so, Krystal, what's your big mistake?
Gosh, I made so many, and I'm not ever, I'm not the professional. That's not true. I'm trying to be the professional, but I'm not perfect. Yeah. So we could talk about my mistakes for a long time, and I'm not here to hide any of them. But probably the biggest thing that I think I've done, and I hopefully am learning my lesson from, is, when you make a bad hire, fail fast and don't
Yeah.
hang on to them. And I can look back over, the 13 years or so that I've been doing home care, and how many times did I make the wrong hire and I just didn't get rid of the person, whether it's because, you just fall in love with them. You love the people you work with. You spend more time
Yeah.
with them than your family at home. And I never take a employment termination lightly. I don't care what happened or how mad they made me, because you're dealing with somebody's livelihood. And it's so
Sure.
hard to just say, okay, well, you're done, you're out. And
Yeah.
I've held on to people too long. And because that, the business has suffered. And I probably can say that I've lost some really, really great people because I didn't make that decision, even though the writing was on the wall. And that's probably the biggest mistake that I've made multiple times. And I'm trying to get better at it. So
Yeah.
it's,
I think hiring is such an imprecise science, and the impacts of getting it wrong are pretty extensive. I mean, you kind of alluded to some of the cultural challenges that resulted in losing some really great team members because you weren't able to part ways with the person that you should have quickly enough. Is there a particular person that comes to mind that you're like, I lost them because of that, and that was a wake-up call and made me realize that things had to change?
I can't think of somebody who I specifically lost, but I can say, one thing I was going to say when you mentioned that was that, nobody teaches you how to interview. They just kind of assume just hire the right people. And it's like, okay, well, how do you do that? That's a lifetime of learning and finding out if you have the right questions, and how do you read the right people and things, because you have, some of it's personality and some of it is like just asking the right questions. Can they do the job? Right. And there's a big difference between the two of those. So I think that, when you hire the wrong person, and then, for me, I not only hired the wrong person, the writing was on the wall. And so I'm like, oh, let's promote them, or something like that. I've done that. And that's like, oh man, now I'm looking back going, I was not only stupid enough to hire them, I was stupid enough to promote them. And worse than that, I kept them around. And as I'm watching it all fall, around me, and I can think of one specific time where we had this sweet little gal. She had been a caregiver for us. We promoted her up into a front desk reception, and she was just rocking the situation. I had our HR director who was just amazing at her job, like probably one of the highest proficiencies in getting the job done. Very much black and white, just doing an incredible job. But she was really, really hard on her team members. And week after week, I'd come in and the little receptionist would just be in tears because somebody had jumped down her throat because, she didn't say the right thing on the phone. It was just like nitpicky little things, right? And one day I found her in the parking lot just bawling. And, this had been going on for 3 or 4 months. And it's like I wasn't letting go of the HR director who really wasn't doing a good job. It wasn't like connecting with her team, but she was doing an amazing job as a HR director. And so it's like you see them and like, they're doing their job. How can I fire them? But when it's taking such a huge toll on somebody else, and that poor little thing was in the parking lot in tears, that she should have never been in that position. And I tried, we'll talk to her, and we wrote her up or whatever. But I mean, I let this go on way, way, way too long. And I did lose the little receptionist. She ended up, leaving us to go somewhere else. And that should have never happened, and, she was a entry-level position really into the office. She wasn't somebody who was, had a master's degree and was, social work and wasn't, anything else, but she was valued too. So why did I let it get to the point that we kind of abused her for 6 months? And in the end, I did end up having to terminate the HR director, which, that was hard. And, and I told her, I love you as a person and we can always be friends, but I just can't be your employer anymore. And that was heartbreaking because, it just changed that relationship too. And that was hard.
So how do you hire now?
We've done a lot to really step back. Probably the biggest thing we've done is we really did, sit down and decide what is our core values. And I decided that was a huge piece of what needs to be. And I actually just learned something with one of my last management hires. But we have created our questions when we're hiring, whether it's a caregiver or a manager or whatever. We really do have questions that are around our 3 core values, and trying to figure out and pull out the information to see if they actually align with our core values.
Sure.
And the problem was that we weren't actually giving that back to the person we were hiring. We had all the right questions, we were getting the information from them, but we never actually really presented that back to them. And I had a manager that we hired, and we were talking, and she came in to tell me she wasn't accepting the job and why. And we sat down and started talking about it. She's like, if you told me that, I would never have questioned it. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So we're still learning how to do it. But I think that really knowing, what is really truly important to you in your business is a huge, huge piece of the hiring, and developing those specific questions around that, and to know whether or not they align with what's important to you.
Yeah. So you've teased the core values. Tell me what the core values are.
For us, we brought Karen. Karen's heart is our first one, the heart of adult care assistant, that truly caring and loving for somebody, like that need to help somebody, doing the right thing when nobody's looking, the heart of adult care assistants. The second one is advocacy. That's advocating our client caregivers, advocating for their client as far as, what needs that they have, speaking up, communicating well with the office, but it's also advocating for themselves, letting us know, hey, this client's not working for me, or I need additional training. For the rest of the agency and for myself personally, I do a ton of advocacy here in Arizona. We are a non-regulated state. And so we don't even have to meet our caregivers. We don't have to do background checks or drug tests. It's shocking. Arizona is kind of the Wild West for a reason. Right. And so doing a lot of advocacy and education around, not just home care, but for our seniors to help make things better. Like back in 2014, my grandfather had been killed in a golf cart accident years before. Where one of my offices is located is the Sun City, which is the iconic retirement community. And during the spring, like right now, you might pull up to the red light in your SUV and you're surrounded by 15 golf carts. And back in 2014, the golf carts were not allowed to drive on the easement, which is what we call bike lanes. Right. They had to drive in the driving lane. So every week I was driving by somebody who had been in some kind of a golf cart versus a car accident. I'm like, we got to change this. And so we did. So now Maricopa County, you are required to drive on roads that are under 35 miles an hour. And you must drive in the easements. The only time you can drive into the driving lane is when you're coming to an intersection to allow cars to turn right. So we've probably saved, hopefully, hundreds and hundreds of lives just by doing a little bit of advocacy work. So that's
amazing. And then what's the third core value?
And the third core value is a positive impact. The way that, I think that one thing we forget, especially our caregivers, we give them this task list, every software company has it, like what ADLs did you do? Did you, I took out the garbage, check. I gave them their medication, check. I made them lunch, check. Gave them a bath, check. Yeah, I'm done. You forget to engage. So how are we engaging with our clients to make a positive impact in their lives? And so, that's huge for us, is just how are we making their lives better, helping them stay safe at home.
So it sounds like you've gotten a lot better at identifying those core values in prospective employees. And I would guess like just being really clear internally on what those values are goes a long way towards, that's how you score the rubric. But are there questions that you've asked that are really great for getting somebody to open up about like one of those core values and how they kind of impact their day-to-day work?
Yeah, we have several. I'm trying to think of one that's specific that would be a great one. I think one of my favorite questions, I'm not sure if it brings up my core values, but it's a very telling question. We all ask for references. Yeah. And we all call the references, and, half the time you don't really know who you're talking to. So we always, it's kind of a hit or miss. But I have found that people don't like to lie for somebody else. Right. So when I'm in the interview, a lot of times I will ask, you gave me 3 references. Can you tell me about each of these references and why you chose them, and what do you think they're going to say when I call them? And it's really telling, because they're not going to lie for that other person, and they will come out and tell you, well, this is my mother-in-law, and she'll probably tell you I'm really great. And suddenly you get all this honesty where, if you just kind of, go and call the mother-in-law, she's not going to tell you she's the mother-in-law, right? So I have found that has been a great one to ask, to just kind of get a different perspective. Yeah. So, yeah.
I love that. And then as you think about like the next time you go through this hiring process for somebody internally, how are you going to do things differently so that candidate really knows what your core values are and is able to decide, yes, this is a place I want to be at, or maybe this place isn't for me?
Well, I love it when we can make our interviews more of a conversation versus a rapid fire, here's my 20 questions. And so I think that we're really working hard on trying to have more of a conversational interview and sharing a little bit about us. And even just talking to those three core values. We have a video back in 2020 when the world shut down. I had 14 caregivers that we needed desperately and coming in for orientation. And we got the notification, and the office that we were going to do that in is actually located on one of our hospital campuses on the Banner Boswell Hospital campus. And so when the hospital shut down, we had to get out. It wasn't like, oh, we can still kind of do this. And we needed them. So really quick, I grabbed a video camera and we threw together an orientation video that we were able to shoot out to at least get a lot of the information. And we tried getting things up on Zoom and that type of thing, because it was really super important for us to kind of keep that kind of rolling. We still use that video, even though we tell people it's a little outdated or what have you, and things. And so, just in that video, we talk about those three core values. And then when they come into the orientation in our interview process, we're talking about, so we just continue to talk about that all the way through to the very point that we're actually giving that job offer and saying, okay, here you go. This is your offer. And very, very distinctly, who we are. And we're trying to, again, make that more of a conversation.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, let's move to something that is underrated in the industry. You think it's really important, but it's typically something that gets overlooked.
I think that probably the caregiver appreciation. I really think that, we get so wrapped up in our numbers, what's our weekly hours? What's our weekly billable hours? What is our, revenue? Are we growing and things like that? And sometimes we start seeing our caregivers kind of as commodities, and it's just like an item. I don't think we appreciate them enough, and so I often see that as being kind of the place that we kind of, I think, fail sometimes as home care owners. We just we forget to see them as people.
Yeah, you're speaking my language here. As listeners will know, this is the stuff that I get really excited about. But I think the times that it makes sense to show appreciation to caregivers often is when they've done something heroic and they've come in and they've saved the day and they've picked up a shift at the last minute. And we're not going to forget those opportunities to appreciate caregivers. We are so effusively grateful that we don't have to call this client and their family and tell them we can't make it to the shift because we couldn't find a caregiver to staff it. And so we are so grateful. But I think the thing that happens often is those milestones that matter to the caregiver, but aren't a world-changing thing for us in our operations, is that 90-day mark or the 6 months or a year or their birthday. And it's those little things that stack up and either create a really remarkable employee experience. Wow, I've worked at other agencies before and nobody remembered to call me after the first visit with a new client. I think we might do it in the orientation process, that somebody has a first visit with a client for the first time, and we're going to call and check in and see how it is. But how consistent are we on the second time they've got a brand new client, 3 or 4 months down the road? Are we checking in with them at that point in time? And so that communicative nature of staying in touch and top of mind with people. And I love that you're using video already, because that's a really powerful tool to make that feel really personalized, but it can also be pretty scalable. And so, what are some of the things that your team is doing along the way to make sure that the caregiver journey is delightful, is unique, is something that doesn't just feel like, oh, I'm one of 150 caregivers on the team?
Yeah, we have a lot of things built in because I feel like it's such an important piece of who we are and what we do. So even from the initial contact, the way that we use a drip campaign to be able to help, make sure that we're communicating on a regular basis for the applicant as that hiring process and trying to get them speed to hire with that. Once they come into orientation, we tell them, okay, we're kind of transitioning from our recruiting team over to our care team. And we actually have, we call her our case aide. Each of our offices has one that their whole job is to be the liaison between the caregiver and the case management team. So that it's kind of like between them and the office, if you will. And so that case aide is going to be in that orientation, doing the skills assessment training, also providing additional hands-on training. They'll be out in the field with the caregivers, checking in on them, like a supervisory type visit to help with additional training, making sure they have the resources that they need and that type of thing. So that's one piece. I love the fact that we also do, a lot of agencies do the morning stand-up meetings, where we all call in every morning. So we all get on a Zoom call every morning. 9 a.m. If you try to call our office, we are not going to be available for, anywhere from 15 minutes to 30 minutes because we're going to do that morning meeting. And each day we have a different topic that we're going to be updating each other to keep the entire team on the same page. And on Wednesday, and today is Wednesday, it's my favorite day because this morning we started out just really positive with our entire team gathers on that morning meeting and we do caregiver shout-outs. And I love that because it's our managers, it might be our schedulers saying, hey, this caregiver has been really rocking it. She's been taking a whole lot of extra shifts or whatever.
Sure.
It might be my case manager who is working with a, high acuity case. And she's like, this caregiver has really stepped up her skill level. She's taken on that additional training or what have you. Our case aide might see them, walk in on a client. We had one where the client has some dementia and he had been having some behaviors and the caregiver took it upon herself to bring her guitar. And as our case aide came in for a supervisory visit, the two of them were sitting there just singing at the top of their lungs. And he is just so content and happy now because she saw a need and brought something along to kind of help, bridge and bond with him. Or this morning we had 3 of our caregivers got called out just for showing up, being consistent, showing up on time and being there and not calling out a lot. It might be just something that simple. Sometimes it's the clients who are calling each other out or the other caregivers when they've witnessed another caregiver doing something amazing or how they engaged with their client or what have you. And then we utilize that to become, we're really corny. So, my HR director keeps a list of and you can call somebody out. That one caregiver can get 5 call outs on Wednesday morning. It doesn't matter. Her name goes in 5 times. And my HR director keeps a list of all of them. And then at the end of the month, we have a spinning wheel. And we all sit around going, oh, this is the last Wednesday of the month. And we watch it spin until our caregiver of the month comes up. It's dumb, but we celebrate it. And then we celebrate them. We bring flowers out to them. We take pictures and we put it in our newsletter. We just make kind of a big to-do about it. And then their beautiful picture goes on our wall as the caregiver of the month for a whole year. They're up there smiling at us. And I love that. It's our favorite piece.
That's really great. And I love that there's like an internal and external marketing case for this, because when you're consistently celebrating your caregivers, like, if a caregiver is mentioned in a Google review, like that is such a more powerful Google review than these people were good and took care of mom. It's like, no, like the thing that's going to communicate and really convert prospective clients is there a person that I can picture taking care of mom here? Right. And, I think the great caregiver culture is an operational solve and makes running the business easier. But great caregiver culture is such a strong marketing tool as well.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And this morning on our morning meeting, one of my schedulers shared with me when she was doing we also do our check-in calls throughout their first 90 days. And then even beyond that, we actually have a whole schedule that we do this. But Nicole was on and she on the morning call and she's like, I just wanted to share with everybody, I've been doing my check-in calls. And she goes, just about every caregiver I talk to mentions in one way or another that we're different. And she was asking them why. And they said, it's because you don't just say that you appreciate your caregivers, you really do. And that really made me feel really good because that culture has become just part of who we are. Again, showing the heart of adult care assistance is, actually putting it out there and actually appreciating the people who work hard, who are out there in the front lines doing the hard work. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so. Well, that's so important, and that's so close to what I talk to owners about on a day-to-day basis. And so, really, appreciate you sharing that, all the hard work you've done to build that into the culture and the fabric of your organization.
Can I just mention one more thing before you change subjects? I was just going to mention that it really helps with the caregiver retention. This month, I have a caregiver who has been with the company 17 years.
Wow.
Longer than I have. And I have another one that's coming up in 3 months. She will be 16 years with the company. So we do have this really long relationship. They've become like family. And, they stick with us through thick and thin, which is amazing. And I think a lot of that has to do with the team that I have working with me who truly, truly appreciates them. And they know that. So I think that's amazing. So,
yeah. 17 years, 16 years. That's unbelievable. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting.
Now I'm going to change subjects because that's what I do on this show. You guys are all subject to my ADHD. Sorry, everybody. We talked about a big mistake you've made. What's a little mistake that you see home care owners make all the time? And if they stopped, it'd make their lives or their businesses like 10 times better.
I think that probably not putting together like really strong processes. Like I did that early on where it's just like, you're just kind of winging it, especially as a new operator, you're just trying to keep up.
Yeah.
I just felt like I was running to keep up with the flow. And as we started opening up each of the other offices, and I didn't buy another agency each time I've opened an office. I've done that, but I've done it locally. I haven't used it to actually open a new territory. I've always done it very, very organically, where I literally find the area I want to go into and I start hiring the people. And as I started doing that, I started realizing that each office was doing things differently and my life was a nightmare. And so when we finally stopped and went, okay, it's kind of like, some people hate this analogy, but it's kind of like the McDonald's hamburger, right?
Sure.
You show up at McDonald's. I don't care if you're in Kentucky, Arizona, or California. When you drive into that drive-thru and you order yourself a Big Mac, you're getting pretty much the same exact hamburger no matter what location you're at. So, if you're going to be looking to expand your company or what have you, I really think that what we fail to do is we fail to take that and make it the McDonald's hamburger, like put those processes in place. And so early on, a lot of operators, I think, get burned out because they're trying so hard to spin so many different plates when if everybody was doing it the same way, it just makes it so much easier. And so that's one thing I think that we just don't focus on as much as I think it's just so important. And once you get that into place, it's like you kind of become unstoppable, getting that really good solid foundation.
Yeah. One of the things that you've shared with me previously was like you guys have developed from a recruiting perspective some automations and standard processes that even happen without your intervention. Like these sequences are going out, caregivers are in the recruitment process, they're getting reminded to do certain steps. And when they get on the other side of that process, sometimes they're like, wow, you guys aren't as consistent as you were during
Right.
the interview process. And it's because there was not only like a standard operating procedure, but there was also like automations in place that didn't require human intervention to make sure that they happened, which I think is really smart as well.
Yeah, and it can come back to bite you, but what it also
Sure.
did is it challenged my team to step it up because what
Yeah.
was happening is like during that recruiting process, we have the automations and the drip campaigns coming in going, hey, you need to send in your credentials, or hey, don't forget to fill out this form, or don't forget this or whatever. And if they text or emailed in, you can set up with AI, especially great responses, and it's getting so good that they once in a while they'll get into an argument with the computer, and you're like, we're not texting you, whatever.
Yeah.
But then they get on the other side where, a lot of the automation isn't going to be able to translate into, hey, I need to send you some information. Mr. Jones has a doctor's appointment today or whatever, or hey, my schedule needs to change. And we're not responding like instantly. And so,
Sure.
we need to, but it was a good reminder. Hey, we need to make sure we're responding to that caregiver quickly, not at the end of the day. They, text in at 8:00 in the morning with a question or a concern. And we're looking at our text messages for the first time at 4:00 in the afternoon. That's not acceptable anymore.
Yeah.
We've got to get to them, and be checking on them more frequently. So it actually, I think, made us a better team as well. And we are still looking for other ways to automate even that internal stuff once they become a caregiver, because there's so much more we can do. And so we're looking ways to automate that. And I think you and I even talked about maybe some ways to even help automate some of that caregiver appreciation, right?
Yeah, that's the name of the game for us. Is we want no manual entry. We don't want people looking at spreadsheets, and we want many of these touch points to be something that we set up once and that happen whether or not we remember to execute on it. And so I've got customers who recently have filmed a video of the whole office having a big to-do about somebody's birthday, and they'll have that birthday message go out to each caregiver automatically on their birthday, along with some rewards. And then the icing on the cake is, if there's bandwidth and if it's part of somebody's day-to-day, to be able to reach out to that caregiver, text, phone call, whatever. But the thing that they really appreciate is that even if home care gets busy, and I'm sure your agency never gets busy, but even if it gets crazy, you have the ability to know that that stuff is happening whether or not you remember, and anything that your team's able to do on top of that, is icing on the cake.
I can tell you that probably those videos are probably one of the most touching moments. I had a friend that every year he would send a Facebook video to all of his friends, and he would record them individually for each person. I mean, he was pretty amazing that way. And it was a puppet, and he'd be like, "Hi, Krystal," and it was just a silly little, 15-second little video wishing me a happy birthday. He passed away unexpectedly. And I still have those videos, and I can't tell you how much that meant to me every time. And we weren't like super, super close friends, but just having that video come in every year. And my last birthday passed and he wasn't there to send me the video. And I was kind of the sad moment, but it's like you don't realize how personal that video can actually be. I think that's an amazing idea. And so, those are things that we can use, we can all tap into. And I know you've got some ways of just automating it. So it's kind of like, you don't even think about it. You just record it once and it's just done. That's awesome. I love that.
Yep. Okay, wonderful. Well, we talked about a lot of mistakes and things that have gone wrong, but I want to end the episode talking about something that has happened lately in your business that you're really proud of.
So we just, this last quarter, we noticed that we needed to bring up our Google reviews. And so, we all kind of talk about it. Yeah, it makes a big difference. But if you think about it, anytime you go to the restaurant or something, you always check the Google reviews. And if there's not very many of them, you're like, yeah, I don't know if that restaurant's really all that great, even if it has a 5-star review or whatever. So I challenged my team at the beginning of this quarter. I said, okay, let's see, I'm challenging you. How many Google reviews can we get this quarter? And I just counted and we had 27 Google reviews come in, 5-star reviews for us. Actually, I think we had 1 or 2 4-stars, but if I'm going to be honest, but I mean, it was awesome to see the team stepped it up, and it's really wasn't that hard. They were actually saying how easy it was and how good it felt. And a lot of times, like you mentioned, some of our caregivers were mentioned by name. So then they even got a little special, incentive as well to just say, hey, you're doing an amazing, amazing job. And we have something that we can go tangibly back and say that,
Yeah.
So it was just really cool seeing how they really stepped up to do it. I'm really proud of them.
Yeah. Well, and I like that you mentioned that you got almost all 5-star reviews and then a couple of 4-star reviews, because the 5-star across the board actually creates a lack of trust. But if somebody's got a 4.6-star review, that is somebody that, while they're not perfect and they don't pretend to be perfect, consistently delivers a pretty good experience. And we can all look at what the content of the negative or the less than perfect reviews are and make a determination for ourselves whether or not we trust that person. But actually, I like 4.6 stars as the gold standard.
The magic number.
That's the magic number.
It's so funny you said that, because the other day, as all these Google reviews were kind of coming in and stuff, I can't remember if it was like Glassdoor or something, sent me this message going, you're doing really great on your Google reviews, but XYZ ABC, agency has actually a 5-star review. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it was an agency I never knew before. So I looked them up, of course, right? And I pulled them up. They had 5 reviews. 3 of them were identical by different names. And I'm like, oh, that really, really feels authentic.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so they may only have 5. I think we have 78 in one of our offices. And, and a lot of those, are, and that is we're real. Okay. I didn't share with you my company guarantee, but I don't know, I think every agency should have a guarantee. Ours, I guess, is maybe a little bit silly, but our company guarantee is that, we're people, and I guarantee we're going to screw up because we're human, right? But our guarantee is that we're going to screw up, but we're going to have a caring, authentic, and team come up alongside you to correct the mistake, because it's going to happen. But how are we going to come alongside you and make things right? So you're going to have a very responsive, caring, authentic team that's going to come alongside you and make sure we fix it. So it's the best that we can. So
that is the best guarantee I've ever heard. Stuff will go wrong. Some of it will be our fault, but we're going to be there to sweep up the mess together.
We're going to make sure we clean it up. Yes.
Oh, I love that.
We're not going to try to hide it.
Before we get out of here, what would you like to plug?
I want to plug our caregivers. My husband went through a long, ugly journey that I would not wish upon my worst enemy. And I became the family caregiver. A lot of times, we are, I married him. So I made that promise, and I love him. But when you stop and think about a caregiver, they're doing this for complete strangers. And I'll tell a really quick story. Years ago, the hospital that our office sits on their campus, I got a call from the director of nursing. And she's like, hey, listen, we just got a 97-year-old lady come in. She's unresponsive. She's probably not going to make it to the night. Her daughter, she has one living relative. Her daughter, she lives in Europe. She's probably not going to make it home, make it back to say goodbye, but she doesn't want her mom to be alone. Do you have a caregiver who could just come and sit at the hospital with her? I was like, absolutely. I called the daughter, found out some really great information about, this woman was a really strong Christian woman. Her faith was really, important to her and everything else. And so we went ahead and scheduled out a couple of caregivers. Fast forward, the woman lived 11 days before she passed. And after she passed, that same director of nursing called me up and she's like, hey, Krystal, I want to give you a little feedback. about your caregivers and the experience we had with your agency. And of course, when you get that call from the director of nursing at a hospital, you're like, oh, crud. Like, what did we do, right? How did we come through with that company guarantee? How did we screw up? And she's like, no. She goes, I don't know if you know the impact that your caregivers can make. And she said that during that 11 days that they started noticing a trend with the other hospital staff was making a trip through that woman's unit to come by and just witness what was going on, because the rumor had started spreading that our caregivers were sitting there. And she goes, they would come by and they would be sitting there, and sometimes they'd be rubbing lotions on her hand or telling them stories about their kids as if it was like their grandmother, or reading to her from the Bible. Or sometimes she said we'd even hear singing down the hall. You'd hear the caregivers singing to her and that type of thing. She goes, I don't know if you realize, but she never regained consciousness, but I think she lived 11 days because the hearings, they say, the last thing to go, and they knew she was being loved on. And she said, what really got me was not the fact that your caregiver sat there next to her bedside. They could have been, playing on Facebook or whatever, but they engaged with her even though she couldn't respond to them. But she goes, what was even more amazing to me was the fact that these people, these women and men who sat there in the hospital with them, never even had shared as much of a hello with this woman prior to this. She was a complete stranger to them. And so when you stop and you think about being a caregiver, you're doing this for, some of the most personal, intimate things for somebody else. And I think that, those caregivers need to be really honored and admired for the heart and the love that they share. And I just would like to maybe promote your caregivers and really think about, how they're impacting the lives of somebody else and how they're positively making somebody else's world just a little bit better, even all the way up to the very last breath.
Yeah, that's such a great story. And one of the things that I've taken to saying is that our best caregivers are caregivers when they're at work, and they're caregivers when they're not at work. And everybody knows a great caregiver. It's something that's kind of baked in, and we get to find those people, and we get to, direct them to serve the clients that we're entrusted with. But at the end of the day, you find those people, and they are folks that we need to treasure and really, show how valuable they are to the business.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Krystal, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed it.
It's been my privilege. This has been a lot of fun. So, David, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
On behalf of the team here at Zingage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zingage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.